morning sun flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. I can't break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. I can't break away. Oh, no, I can't break away. Ooh, I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Good evening. Welcome in. First off, Sparky, thank you for the resub 16 months. J Mitch, thank you for the resub 13 months. Manny, thank you for the tier 3 resub at 20 months. Has it been 20 months? And Rocket as well, 20 months, tier 1. Thank you very much. So let's get some things out of the way at the jump here tonight. This is a big deal episode. I would say it's probably the most important episode in the era since the Estates General were like forced into existence and then transitioned to the National Assembly. So that like National Assembly episode is probably the most important episode until this one. This one's a big deal. It will also mark the end of season 2 of the quiz. This is a major marker point. Tonight's episode is a significant milestone in the history of the French Revolution. It's actually such a significant milestone that if you were a historian, you could argue that this is the end of the French Revolution. I believe it's the end of a significant and the probably most prominent phase of the French Revolution, but it doesn't really end until Napoleon takes over. But that's an idea of how big of a deal it is. The other thing is when we get near the end, some of the descriptions of what's going to go down is graphic. Graphic from, if you've played plenty of video games and watched some movies on, some violent movies on television, or, you should be fine. But it's a step past what we usually describe. And I think it's necessary. So just bear that in mind when we get to the actual throwdown that's coming. Yeah, like Rise. If you played Rise Son of Rome, you're good. So, like I said, what is known as the Thermidorian reaction, and we all now know that the name Thermidorian is rooted in the month of the Republican calendar that it occurred in. It is not the end of the French Revolutionary era. It certainly marks...
Shame!
Shame on
Shame!
you! Shame!
Shame! Shame!
Shame on you for stealing from your friends. Right off the bat. It doesn't end the... You have to remember that the French Revolution begins with the financial crisis that tumbles into a social and economic upheaval of a system. The ancien regime doesn't return after tonight, right? The king is not reinstated, or his heir is not reinstated, or whomever his brothers are not reinstated after tonight, because we have a 5-year period between what happens tonight and a man named Napoleon. But it definitely marks the end of the French Revolution as this great and terrible social experiment that sought to reform, rebuild, and remake like every aspect of France. That experiment began in May of 1789, when the Third Estate stood up and effectively said, all we want is a voice in government, right? Remember way back to when the...
Mama always said life
Gilly,
was
good
like a
evening.
box of chocolates.
Hopefully Ari is doing well. I appreciate the updates that you gave us over the past couple days. Hopefully she is on the road to being, fully mended, and it's good to see you, my friend. But remember that all that the lead up into 1789 was about was double the third and vote by head, right? And the problems that surrounded that led to almost a takeover. But then it took a life of its own from that point forward, right? And without any exact theory or precise rules of conduct, as Robespierre put it, pushed forward. No worries, Gilly. Happy to see you. VOD will be up on YouTube pretty much right after we're done here tonight, as always. Sai, welcome in. So again, this experiment starts in May 1789. Third Estate just says, double the third, vote by head. That's all we want. And then it rolled from there due to mismanagement by the king and his ministry and everyone else. And then it takes off. There's no rules. There's no precise conduct that governs what's happening. And that careening experiment culminates here in the summer of 1794 with Robespierre basically trying to kill his way to that republic of virtue that we've been talking about for 2 episodes. It will end today with the rejection of Robespierre's blood-soaked idealism of the, proper virtuous revolutionary on the fateful day of 9 Thermidor year 2. And after, again, the Thermidorian reaction, which is what historians call it, the revolution will become far less concerned with these lofty Enlightenment philosophical visions. It will instead be about picking through everything that just happened and the vast array of reforms and all the stuff that has just been unleashed on France over the past 5 years. And they're going to take what works and permanently cement it into law, and then they're going to take the stuff which is, crazy or just non-functional and throw it out. For the men who governed France after this episode, there were only going to really be 2 goals left on the table. Win the war that is still going on with the First Coalition and stay in power. The coming French Directory, which is the new governmental system that'll be here in about a year, so in 1795 is when the Directory will move in. The convention's got about a year of legs left in it while they figure out what to do. The Directory is going to sit atop this very narrow base of support that's predicated almost entirely on their ability to win military victories. They will annul election results they don't like, put down popular uprisings by force, including Napoleon doing it. And they'll always be basically keeping a paranoid eye out for the next threat to their power. So this coming second act that will start after this episode will be more cynical, less idealistic, and ultimately be remembered as little more than the furnace in which one Napoleon Bonaparte was forged. No Committee of Public Safety 2.0. We're going to get into the Directory in subsequent episodes. It's definitely not formed like a dictatorship, though. So don't think that the Directory is going to look like the Committee of Public Safety. But this period after tonight, which gets glossed over, right? Because it's like, oh, Thermidor happens and the Jacobins are deposed. Big deal in history, in world history. There's this 5-year kind of interregnum where it's like, okay, give me to Napoleon. But a lot of the stuff about Napoleon's important that happens in this 5-year period that starts after tonight. It's the second half of the 1790s are rich in drama. The next 5 years after this, we'll see multiple uprisings from counter-revolutionary royalists, far-left proto-communists, because the idea of communism doesn't exist yet. And there will be now terminally embittered former Jacobins that are going to try to reclaim control on this revolution, which will have now slipped through their grasp. After tonight, the French Revolution is not over. I don't believe it. I don't believe most historians believe it. But the era of Jacobin rule over it is about to end. So before we move into that Act 2, we have to bring the curtain down on Act 1, and that's what tonight is. And last episode, we kind of set the stage for what is going to go down tonight. So Robespierre's paranoia and ego were expanding so rapidly that a group of men who otherwise had very little in common would come together due to the shared threat that basically Robespierre was presenting. And the first sign that there may be a pending backlash against Robespierre came right after the passage of the Law of 22 Prairial, which we talked about last episode as well. When people lost almost all their rights to defend themselves in the tribunal, it became a crime not to report the supposed crimes of your neighbors. And that list of crimes had been expanded into the realm of Big Brother, where things like inciting disagreement had become a criminal act. So members of both the Committee of Public Safety and the Committee of General Security, and get used to hearing both of those committee names a lot tonight, because it's the fight between them is a big deal. But the Law of 22 Prairial gets passed, and members on both committees, General Security and Public Safety, were not happy with the way in which the law had been introduced and then, proceeded to become law. Because the law was crafted by only Maximilien Robespierre and Georges Couthon. No one else, not even Saint-Just, had been allowed to see it when it was introduced at a convention. Now think about that. You have 12 people that sit on the Committee of Public Safety, right? And they have pretty much ultimate legal authority across France at this point. And the other 10 men on the committee weren't allowed to see the law before it was introduced to the convention. So you've already probably pissed some of them off. Now, Saint-Just is the forever Robespierre loyalist. But how is a committee that is supposed to be governing France and not just one guy supposed to do their job if they're not even allowed to review potential changes to the judicial structure? So annoyed and not a little bit unnerved about being cut out of the process on such a really big important piece of legislation as well, the Committee of General Security outright refused to act after the law was passed and Robespierre handed a list to the Committee of General Security. Remember, they're like the national police force, right? This list of 9 men Robespierre believed were engaged in a yet another counter-revolutionary conspiracy. And when the Committee of General Security received this list, they said, we're not going to do anything with this. But perhaps more importantly, the refusal to act by the Committee of General Security was supported by some of Robespierre's colleagues on the Committee of Public Safety. And so you have to understand that what's going to happen tonight is not about the Committee of Public Safety fighting against all of its enemies. It's not that. It is about Robespierre and his enemies fighting against everybody who didn't support them. And that includes people on the Committee of Public Safety. So just 2 months after both committees had kind of closed ranks in solidarity to put down the ultras and dispose of the indulgents, the rift between Robespierre and almost everybody else was threatening to break them apart again. And for the rest of June 1794, Robespierre's enemies began to lay the groundwork for an actual move against him. And as I said last episode, I don't think it's possible to know if there really was a conspiracy against Robespierre before he claimed there was a conspiracy. This is a conspiracy of people in power who he was linking back to William Pitt funding them. But there certainly was a conspiracy as these men banded together when they probably otherwise would not have, due to the shared mutual threat posed to them by being named by Robespierre as conspiring with each other against France. And as a prelude to our far more cynical post-Thermidorian French Revolution, the link between the conspirators had nothing at all to do with ideology or class or belief system. It's not about crying wolf. It's not about that at all. It's about Robespierre began to lay these open-ended conspiracies he could just lump his enemies into. That's what the problem was. He was in such power that he could basically say, there is a conspiracy out there. I'll get back to you, and I'm telling you this on Monday. I'll get back to you Friday with a list of people who pissed me off this week that are involved in that conspiracy. That's pretty much how it was working. But this conspiracy had nothing to do with their ideologies. We spent a lot of time on ultras and indulgence and the Mountain and the Girondins and all of these factions that have risen up based on political ideas that have gone basically to battle with each other, and usually the more conservative body loses. But this is not about that at all. It had to do with the fact that they were all afraid of what Robespierre might do to them if he was left to his own devices. And so the coup of 9 Thermidor is not about overthrowing the tyranny of the Committee of Public Safety and ushering back in the idealistic and democratic, the forgotten about Constitution of 1793. Because remember, this was a really nice Constitution they wrote last year that they really put on a table and forgot about. It was about a bunch of men trying to stay alive for one more day. Think about the bloodshed so far, where anybody who was disloyal to Republican France was dying in droves back in the fall and the winter of 1793, and that had morphed into, I had made that statement about the interests of the men in power will conflate their interests into the interest of France, and then the terror will become about purging the enemies of the men in power, not about purging the enemies of France. And these men knew it. These men knew that if they didn't do something, something would be done to them. And they simply said, let's get in front of it. So the most prominent of those conspirators were drawn from the ranks of those recalled under the law of 22 Prairial representatives on mission. Specifically, Joseph Fouché. And he's on the left side. And I do have these broken up by kind of which team they're on. Joseph Fouché was that arch de-Christianizer, the guy who kind of got that ball rolling. He is the ultimate survival artist of the French Revolution. He had somehow escaped the fate of the ultras, despite the fact that he had been on the leading edge of leftist radical politics and in France when they went down. And then there was also a 24-year-old kid, basically, named Jean-Lambert Tallien. Tallien is far left bottom row. A pencil sketch of got a thing around his neck. Tallien had been the representative who had been sent to Bordeaux, which is a city we didn't cover very extensively in the aftermath of the fall of federalism. He had been there in Bordeaux to deal with the aftermath of the fall of federalism on behalf of the convention. Tallien was not suspicious to Robespierre because his brand of terror had been too harsh. And remember, Robespierre was trying to bring it in on both sides to this narrow path where he was coming down just as hard on representatives that had been too harsh in their application of the terror, as well as those who had been too lenient. Tallien ends up being one of those too lenient guys. He had started out pretty ruthless, executing Girondin allies in Bordeaux, because remember, that's pretty much the hub of where the Girondins largely came from. But while he was there, Tallien fell in love with a former wife of a nobleman who had emigrated, and she... Yo, Omega! 20 months of Tier 1. Thank you very much, my friend. This woman that Tallien was involved with began to use her influence over him to get him to pretty much stop using the guillotine altogether. And that one woman, whose name I can't track down, is pretty much why the terror was not terrible, or as terrible as, say, in Lyon or out in Nantes, in Bordeaux. And another one of those conspirators who deserves special mention at this point is Paul Barras. So bottom row, right column on the left. The guy that's got kind of the hair coming out over his face. He had been the representative on mission down in Marseille. And he is hugely important, even though this is the first time in 31 episodes we're mentioning him. Because he will go on to be the main executive force in the French Directory in about a year. Joining these ex-representatives, and these 3 ex-representatives on mission were really the drivers of the
Remember to
Thermidorian reaction.
clonk that follow button.
Joining them were men who came from 3 other groups. First, there were the men who had been, once associated with the now purged ultras. Specifically, that meant the Committee of General Security, because remember when we talked about them 2 episodes ago, pretty much everybody on the Committee of General Security was a left-leaning ultra. And just as an institution, the Committee of General Security leaned leftist. They leaned turn up the terror. And then the 2 sans-culotte members of the Committee of Public Safety. Remember, back in September of 1793, in order to mollify the enragés and the sans-culottes, 2 men had been appointed to the Committee of Public Safety to get them to shut up effectively. And that's Jean-Marie Collot d'Herbois, who's been very central to what we've talked about for several episodes, and then basically his lesser active partner in crime, Jacques-Nicolas Billaud-Varenne. You also remember that Collot d'Herbois, during the run-up to the execution of the Ultras, took a loyalty oath back to the Committee of Public Safety to show which side he was on. Those 2 guys are going to jump sides, and they're going to become part of the conspiracy. The second group that conspirators came from was anyone who had ever been on friendly terms with Georges Danton, right? Because that's the other side of what had just gone down. The indulgents were all eradicated around the same time as the Ultras. There's no one that comes from that group that's extremely important for our discussion tonight, but realize that Robespierre had put himself on this narrow track. And so pretty much everyone that was not on that narrow track was now looking at him going, when's it my turn? When are you going to come after me? And they all started to go, yeah, we should probably do something about this. And then third, there were the war technocrats. Excuse me. And remember, the war technocrats were the guys who were interested in basically using modern science to make war more effective and efficient. And there was no bigger war technocrat during this time period than Lazare Carnot. Lazare Carnot being the author of the Amalgamé and the presenter and deliverer of the Levée en masse, which is so formative to modern society. These guys, and Lazare Carnot was not the only war technocrat. There were plenty of officers in the military who were technocrats, but he was certainly the most prominent of them. And they were really getting sick of the busy-bodying Robespierre going out there and meddling with his micromanaging way of just saying, I have to be there to ensure everything is correctly aligned with my idea of how the French Revolution should go forward. But they were also equally tired of Louis Saint-Just. Because now, remember, Louis Saint-Just had just spent some time over the winter and into the spring out on the eastern frontiers, changing how the military worked. It was to the better for the military, but you have guys with shoulder boards and ranks on them who don't like the kid who is like the paper lieutenant colonel in their brain coming out there and telling them how to do their job. Saint-Just was actually starting, remember he originally thought he was a literary genius and wrote books that went nowhere after he ran away from home?
No way!
Yes way. Well, now, because the things he had done on the war front were actually pretty successful, he started to think of himself as a military genius, and he didn't have a problem talking about it either. And so these war technocrats, who were actually, commissioned officers, were looking at this kid who started to present the idea that these officers, Yeah, we can get rid of them because, of course, I'm a military genius. I could run this. I don't need them. So he painted a bullseye on his back. The conspiracy against Robespierre, because that's really what it is, took its first tentative steps out into the light when the Committee of General Security was alerted to the rantings of a religious zealot named Catherine Thiot. Yeah, not a social or political genius. No, he was not a social or political genius. But Catherine or Catherine, and I can't come up with what the correct way to pronounce it, so I'm going with Catherine Thiot because THs tend to be hard T sounds in French. She was a religious zealot. There's no other way to describe what she was. She was a ranting and raving proselytizer for, and it's very, very clear, a bent version of Christianity. It's nothing that I believe that the Catholic Church and the Pope are like, yep, that's dogmatically what we believe. She had a history, and she is below the map on the right. And she was old by this point. She was, I believe, in her 70s at this point. She had a history of religious oddness that dated well back into the Ancien regime. But Catherine Thiot, and I'm saying Catherine Thiot had been telling her followers, of which there was not a small number, that Robespierre was actually one of the two prophesied messiahs, and he was the herald of the last days that were like in the book of Revelation. So you have a guy who just walked down during the cult of the Supreme Being from a mountaintop to deliver the people into this new era of, the civic religion he had cooked up. And there's a street preacher out there with not a small group of people agreeing with her that Maximilien Robespierre is in fact a messiah. That's the political juiciness of this. And so Robespierre's enemies on the Committee of General Security, gleefully launched an investigation into her, because there she is. Is she being paid by Robespierre to promote the idea that he actually is divine? They gleefully launched into this. And there's another way to describe it. Reading about it was like, yeah, these guys were happy to do this. They were like, oh boy, this might be our shot. They gleefully launched this investigation of Thiot. They were looking for, allegedly, they were looking for evidence that she was a paid foreign agent, which is weird. Why would there be a paid foreign agent that's out there telling Paris that Robespierre is their messiah? And that one, I would have thought that it was like, is she a paid agent of Robespierre? But it was mostly like an opportunity to publicly ridicule Robespierre because he had these messianic pretensions. Like the whole cult of the Supreme Being kind of confirms that. The notion of coming down from this fabricated 50-foot high, crafted of cardboard and plaster mountain. And I have it in my brain as he's kind of walking around in almost a spiral form to prolong it because of his ego. He just had presented himself this way. So this was a good opportunity for his enemies to say, let's make fun of that. Let's use that politically against him. But then it got worse. Because everything in this series always has that, right? It's going to get worse. Robespierre played right into their hand. He played right into the hand of the Committee of General Security. Because he intervened. The prosecutor of the tribunal, they arrested Thiot. And he intervened with the prosecutor of the tribunal and told them that under no certain terms could this potentially embarrassing trial of Catherine Thiot move forward. He was basically saying, stop everything you're doing with this woman. Which then lends me back to the theory of, why would he stop it? Did he pay her? Now, nothing in the historical record suggests that he did pay her or had any direct association with her. But that action puts down, just as it did for me when I was reading it, the idea that it's possible. By his sheer weight of, personal influence, Robespierre got the trial canceled. But it was at the cost of appearing now more than ever to be aiming for personal dictatorship, because this was not the Committee of Public Safety saying, stop the trial of Catherine Teo. This was Robespierre saying, stop the trial of Catherine Teo. And then when you begin to peel back everything around that, well, why would he want it stopped? He can't legally do it directly. He needs the committee to do it. So why is he so invested in it to get it done? He basically cashed in favor chips to get this done. Why? Is it because she was embarrassing and that's all? Or is it because there was something more there? Or is it because Robespierre's ego simply couldn't handle the fact that this trial was going to even make mention of the fact that there was a kind of a pseudo cult out there on the streets of Paris who believed he was, the divine delivered Messiah of God. Whatever the reason, he got it stopped. And it is the getting it stopped that people like, wait a minute. Why? And then the absence of fact, which of there is none, people did what I just did. And they said, why would he have done it? And they spun their own logical conspiracy, which I just did. I spun a logical conspiracy that Robespierre had paid her in some way to be out there reinforcing the ideas of the cult of the divine being, or the supreme being. But there's nothing to suggest that he did that. It's just what I think happened. But I can't be sure. So as the conspiracy grew, this group of men now coming together to plot something against Robespierre, and they're starting to come out in the light a little bit. The Committee of Public Safety, inside, and then between the Committee of General Security, the tensions inside the Committee of Public Safety and the tensions between the Committee of Public Safety and the Committee of General Security just kept getting worse. Desbois and Varenne, the two, again, members of the Committee of Public Safety, those sans-culotte members, had really both become convinced at this point that Robespierre had it in for them. And there's plenty of evidence to support that train of thought throughout the spring. So during a Committee of Public Safety meeting on June 26th, that's about 1 month before everything goes down, they both stood up in the committee meeting and denounced Robespierre as a tyrant, which you're going to find this to be a common reaction of the people in power throughout the evening tonight. Robespierre was shocked. He was such an idealist, so convinced that he was on the right path, that the idea of someone within those 12 men standing up and actually denouncing him as a tyrant, it sent him into like a shaking rage. Like he was in angry disbelief. And because of it, he didn't fight in the Committee of Public Safety, but instead boycotts all future meetings of the Committee of Public Safety. He stops showing up. That, for a person who is, it's one of two things. Either his own ego was so badly damaged by this that he couldn't bear to be in the room with these people who didn't support him, or he was so taken aback by it that he couldn't face it anymore. But he steps back from the committee. He doesn't go to it. He goes to it a few more times, but in generally speaking, he stops attending. And after this day, June 26th, with a month to go, basically, until it's the end for him. Remember, this is about the time that all the remaining Girondins are up there in Normandy blowing their heads off because they think that Robespierre is never going to go down. This is around the same time. But after this denunciation by Desbois and Varenne, Robespierre just stops showing up. He rarely attends committee meetings. He stops attending sessions of the convention as well. So he becomes very much Marat-like, Jean-Paul Marat. Now, Jean-Paul Marat had a skin condition and therefore was soaking in a bathtub all the time while he was writing whatever craziness he was writing. But he stopped doing his job with the rest of the people he was supposed to do it with too. And now you have Robespierre, who basically becomes a recluse. Not so many months after he had been a recluse for a month due to being sick. His only and still infrequent regular public appearances for the next month will be at the Jacobin Club, where he knew he could always get that warm round of applause reception for basically whatever he said. And I really think it is that. Robespierre's ego was probably pretty fragile. He probably just didn't know how to deal with the idea that he had achieved a position of pretty supreme authority. And now all of a sudden there were people who were standing up to him going, "You're a tyrant." I don't think he knew how to process it. A lot of times, this withdrawal that happens 1 month before the Thermidorian reaction is portrayed by historians, just like I did, as Robespierre succumbing to his own egotistical hubris. But it is also suggested, and I believe this is possible, that he actually suffered a nervous breakdown. That he was just done mentally. That this was the crack point for everything that he had done and dealt with. This was finally the pebble that brought the wall down. Given the historical writing available, I'm at least open to the concept that his brain cracked in the early summer of 1794 from some form of nervous exhaustion. Again, remember, he was sick and unavailable for whatever reason during the entire month of February. And disease back then, especially diseases that carried high fevers, could have a significant impact on mental capacity. But then he came back to the job and started to execute a lot of people. So right after he's sick, feverish, he comes back to a job where he had to just drop the guillotine on a lot of people, some of whom were his friends. Remember, Georges Danton, maybe not friend, but had been ally for many years. Camille Desmoulins, they were friends. They had been schoolmates. Robespierre was still godfather to Desmoulins' son. So he comes back to the job after being sick and drops the guillotine on these guys and their supporters. And then, he did take another break from public life, not very long, but he did step back for like a week after he did execute Danton. And now he's facing this revolt within the Committee of Public Safety, this body of 12, which now, after he was reluctant to join, he believes he has total authority over and complete control of. It's not beyond the realm of possibilities that all of these factors. It's been a long 5 years. And he's been involved since the National Assembly. It's not beyond the realm of reason that the guy simply had just had enough mentally. That illness added to it. The stress of having executed his friends took him to a precipice. And then this rebellion within the group he didn't trust many people, but probably had the ability to trust the most. It just broke him. It's certainly possible. Robespierre had always been a brilliant political tactician, and at many times a prescient voice of reason against the more radical impulses of the revolution. Right? He'd try to rein them back in from some of that stuff and say, "Hey, de-Christianization is nuts." But that rationality that he possessed and that clarity of thought are clearly just absent from him. They have vacated him in this last month. So near to his end. Everything that happens in June, end of June and into July 1794 for Robespierre is so counter to everything that we know him to be, whether you believe him to be a sinister, evil, God-complexed egoist, or to whatever degree of those things you concur with. Most of them we probably all concur with. The thing that had always been present was how smart he was. How gifted of a speaker he was, and how good he was tactically in the politics behind the scene. And none of that is on display for the last month of his life. It's perfectly plausible to suggest that Robespierre was not just being an overly sensitive egomaniac here. He really does look like he was starting to crack up mentally. It's at least possible, it's plausible to theorize that he did not take this step back from the committee and the convention in June, near the end of June 1794, because he was just affronted, that his honor had been affronted, and he, just couldn't deal with it from a position of ego, that he actually just had it. So we're going to take our first break here, because when we get back, we're going to go into, the stage is now set and the reasons behind it, and the first blow from the group of conspirators on the left has really been landed by Desbois and Varenne. We're going to get into how the dictatorship itself fractures, the way in which the structure of everything that had kind of governed France for about the last year, 9 months to a year, is really just falling apart at this point. So stand up, get a drink, go to the bathroom, all that stuff. We'll be back in a few minutes. And thanks for hanging out tonight. Thank you for all the resubs and for your time and attention. And I'll talk to you in just a few minutes, once I find my BRB button.
No way.
Let's rock!
Welcome back. Full disclosure, had to go to the bathroom really bad, so I kind of went to the break a little early there. Dr. Death Games, welcome in, my friend. So we've kind of set the stage here, right, where we've got a group of men on the left coming from all different places. Carnot, Desbois, and Varenne are all in the Committee of Public Safety. Fouché is not. Tallien is former disgruntled representative on mission as well, and Barras also a former representative on mission. They represent the notable names of a broader conspiracy. But we set the stage that there's these events now embroiling Robespierre, leading into and in the first month of summer, 1794, that really are starting to crack the plaster on the walls. Well, now we're going to put straight cracks in everything that made up his supposed stable dictatorship over France. So one thing that helped to add to Robespierre's stress level, for a man who was probably already well past the line of mental breakdown, and his reclusive paranoia, was a couple of probably assassination attempts on him, which happened before he cracked, or at least he cracked either, mentally for sure, or from an ego perspective, but he cracked. Back on May 22nd, so about a month prior to what we just talked about, this denunciation of Robespierre by Desbois and Varenne, about a month earlier, a disgruntled state employee whose department had been shuttered by the, state apparatus reforms, he staked out a spot near the Tuileries Palace, and he had 2 pistols on him. Now, Robespierre's colleague Desbois came walking along, and the would-be assassin jumped out and fired 2 pistols at him. At Desbois, not Robespierre. Both misfired. It was done at point-blank range, like he was right next to him. But both pistols misfired, and this guy was quickly apprehended. But that's not what matters here. What matters is the guy made an attempt on a committee member's life, and the rumor quickly twisted to say, well, he was probably looking for Robespierre and just got the people mixed up. And so the idea that the dude had misidentified his intended target and that he really was going after Robespierre, this mix-up got legs. And it became, within a month, kind of accepted fact that the assassination attempt was not against Desbois. He was a sans-culotte guy. Why would somebody go after him in the streets of Paris? Had to have been Robespierre he meant to get. But the next day, the day after this happened, this attempted assassination attempt involving Desbois, a 16-year-old girl named Cécile Renaud, who is below the map on the left, there's basically a plate impression of her, which is the best I could do for her. Cécile Renaud comes banging on Robespierre's door, which should give you Charlotte Corday vibes already, right?
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Charlotte Corday comes down from Normandy, bangs on Jean-Paul Marat's door, tricks her way inside, and stabs him. That's how Marat died, right? So the idea that there's a young girl banging on the door of Robespierre should send Charlotte Corday vibes down your spine. She made such a scene about getting in to see him that she was detained and arrested and searched. And for the people who were present, they certainly got the memories of Charlotte Corday and Marat's assassination there. They're like right there in their mind. It wasn't that long ago, actually, for them. It'd be like, imagine how you felt the year after 9/11 with, air travel. That's how they felt about this whole situation with Cécile Renaud, because it wasn't that long ago that Marat had been stabbed to death with a kitchen knife in his own bathtub. While they were searching Cécile Renaud, boop, out come 2 daggers. So the girl banging on Robespierre's door the day after someone had tried to maybe assassinate him on the street was packing 2 knives while she was banging on his door trying to get in to see him. So when questioned, the girl was incoherent and babbling about a bunch of nonsense, saying at one point that she only wanted to see what a tyrant looked like. It's very possible that this girl, Cécile Renaud, was just mentally disturbed. But it doesn't matter. Regardless of if she was an assassin or not, this incident, coupled with what happened the prior day, started Robespierre's danger sense flashing. There's no way it didn't. It put him on high alert and damaged what was probably already shaky mental health after he had executed his friends and, basically run the streets of Paris, red with blood for half a year. Robespierre really does turn into a recluse for his last 2 months on Earth. But meanwhile, out in the world, the cracks in the dictatorship of the Committee of Public Safety continued to widen. And the major problem that it had is a problem we've already talked about. That the committee system itself, the whole structure of all of these committees running inside of, but really kind of independent of, the convention, was all being called into question now. Because it rather seemed like the emergency that all of these committees had been stood up to serve, that the emergency is gone, is past, and the committees had served their purpose, and that most of the threats to France had ebbed, and that maybe, hey, yeah, it was time to say thanks a lot to all the men who had worked their butts off, because they were working their butts off, and let's start thinking about that Constitution of 1793. Why isn't that something we're doing now? Well, the federalism's gone. The Vendée's pretty much quelled. I mean, it's a guerrilla war going on out there, but it's not threatening France anymore. And at this point, the Allies are even out of Belgium. Why do we need the committee? The committees said the reason they needed to exist was to get us through an emergency. That constitutional government couldn't exist until the emergency had passed. That the government had to be revolutionary until France was safe. France looked pretty safe right now. But by Robespierre's logic, with the domestic threats quelled and the Allies evacuating Belgium, it didn't mean that it was time for a government that was... Actually, the way I want to phrase this is different. By Robespierre's own logic, that whole... The government must be revolutionary until there is peace, that's his words. Hadn't it served its purpose? Hadn't this whole system that had been generated to get France past the problem, hadn't it done its job? Wasn't it time to abandon this whole emergency dictatorship system and adopt that long abandoned and generally loved Constitution of 1793, which again will never see the light of day? That's one reason the Committee of Public Safety and the dictatorship was fracturing, because as more and more reasonable people looked at the situation, they said, why do we need you anymore? Even though they had just passed a law giving them more power. But here's the other problem. It's a problem of conscience. The Great Terror was making everyone in Paris equal parts nervous, which you could understand completely, and all of a sudden ashamed about what was going on, right? Think about the past 9-ish months where we're pulling plugs. Yeah, now, exactly. That's my reaction too, Rocket. That's my reaction too. Now you have a problem with it? Now? I think it's more a matter of it was safe to be ashamed of it now, right? Where the iron grip of the dictatorship could be palpably felt to be weakening. And it was safer to say, I don't like drowning people in the Loire River for no good reason. One of the first things here is that the authorities had already been forced to move the guillotine from the Place de la Révolution to a spot like east of the city, where the Place de la Bastille is now today. And then they had to move it again, further east, when the residents near the Place de la Bastille started to complain about how bad it smelled and how much flat-out blood there was. Executions were not this public celebration, this glorious event, as they had been, back even when the king was executed. They had become grim and a mechanical, just daily routine that wasn't much fun for anybody anymore. No one was enthusiastic, for example, when the aforementioned Cécile Renaud and her entire family, mother, father, yes way, sisters, and brothers, were all led off en masse to be murdered by the guillotine for their supposed role in the plot to assassinate Robespierre. Rewind the tape on that one for a second. This girl we just talked about, who may have just been mentally off and banging on the door of Robespierre, she dies. But her mom dies. Her dad dies. Her brothers and sisters die for what she did. For a plot that was never proven. And people in Paris were starting to go, I don't know, man. What are we doing? Why are we letting these guys do this? It was also really to no one's great rejoicing on July 17th, 1794, when I heard a literal massive group of old pious Carmelite nuns, which would be a monastic order, were also led off to the guillotine for the crime of living together communally. Would a child pickpocket was led up to the scaffold, the sympathetic onlookers began to shout, "No more children." What was the point of all of it? As you go into the summer of 1794 in Paris, the people all started to come to this idea, generally, that all of this seemed absolutely unnecessary. It's a little too late for tens of thousands of people who had already died, but not everyone is courageous. And it certainly wasn't safe to come out and say, maybe we don't need to execute the supposed enemies of France like a machine for a long time for a lot of these people. Remember, they had been living in fear. When Camille Desmoulins came out with the old Cordelier, they loved it because here was someone putting voice to their concerns. And that was back in December. And now here we are rolling into the summer. I don't think that this was a revelation for the general everyday person. I think the general everyday person kind of had their head down. And now they were saying enough is enough. So now we're getting really close to the end here. Thermidorian reaction takes place at the end of July. On July 23rd, the Committees of Public Safety and General Security met in a joint session. They came together. They tried to patch up the differences in their breaking partnership. And remember, Robespierre is not in the room. He's staying home for whatever of the two really probable reasons that he is staying home. He's not there. And without him there, this repair almost succeeded. And this is one of those, Rocket likes to say and Gilly likes to say, this is one of those what if moments. Yeah, this is one of those what if moments for me. What if this meeting produces an outcome where they're like, yeah, we can still do business, but Robespierre's the problem. And they just get Robespierre. That probably means there's no Thermidorian reaction. Maybe there's no Napoleon if this meeting goes well. Robespierre's closest allies, Saint-Just and Couthon, both were in this meeting, and they seemed pretty amenable to some kind of deal being worked out to keep everyone working together in harmony. But the very next day, July 24th, Robespierre decides to come out of hiding. Comes back to the political scene for a day and makes it very clear that there will be no duct tape repair of their differences, that he viewed the Committee of General Security, no indeed, to his own detriment, that he viewed the Committee of General Security as suspect, and the Republic of Virtue could not be founded if the wicked were allowed to live and the virtuous were forced to compromise themselves. He made such a big deal about not giving an inch that all the talks about compromise broke down. So we'll take a pause here because this should remind you of a couple of things. One, go back to Jean-Joseph Mounier's refusal to compromise in the early days of the National Assembly about the form of the constitutions, particularly the veto for the king, and how well that went for him. His political idealism forced him to go home and then into exile. But also take it to the modern day, to our current day, where the concept of political purity, which is what Robespierre is here in this moment, he is a political purist. The idea of political purity is measured by your refusal to compromise. We have the term flip flopper, which is, even 20 years old in our lexicon of politics, where someone who changes their stance is seen as a flip-flopper, someone who cannot be trusted with whatever liberal or conservative ideals. And when in fact, the ability to change your position politically in a democracy is the thing that makes democracy work. The idea that your positions are malleable, that you're willing to give a little to get a little, those things are what make representative democracies work. And here you have Robespierre saying, no way, no how will we give anything to those who are wicked. It should ring very clarion true if you evaluate the current modern political state, where you have these sides, and they're probably out on the fringe, they get a lot of attention, and there is political purity judgment made based on how much you agree with everyone else in that group. And then if you disagree with one aspect of that groupthink, you're not committed. You're not one of us. You're the enemy if you don't agree with me. That's this thinking right here. Where reality has to be that things need to change, because they always do. The speed at which that change happens has to be a matter of compromise between these groups who have their ideals about their way forward. And if no one is willing to compromise and come to the middle, it will break down. Because it breaks down here for Robespierre. It broke down for Jean-Joseph Mounier. It has broken down like that repetitively for political purists through history. So when Robespierre comes out of hiding to basically say all this stuff you've just been talking about, all this compromise you want to do with the enemy, the wicked, no, we will not be doing any of that. But those things were looking like the committees were about to break apart. Louis de Saint-Just set to work on a speech that he planned to deliver to the convention in a few days, saying, don't believe all these rumors that these committees aren't getting along. It's all fine. We're fine. We're buddies. But everything wasn't fine. On July 26th, Robespierre was now kind of re-emerging a little bit. Came back out of his seclusion to give a major address. And this is the speech that dooms him. It was an address designed to remind everyone that the danger had not passed, and so the committees were still necessary. The dictatorship was necessary. In this speech, Robespierre denounced yet another foreign-backed conspiracy in his black and white way of, just addressing you're with us or against us, and described, again using the language that we've talked about, he described the conspirators as inhuman monsters, while he himself was an honest and humble servant of the people. It's this again. You will see this as we go through everything we're going to talk about long-term in the whole Fixers Heavy Metal History series. This dehumanization. When you can convince the brain that your enemy is subhuman in some way, doing terrible things to them becomes easy. I speak firsthand to that. I've been forced into that situation in my military career where it's hard to look across and see a set of blue eyes and a person with a soul. But if you don't believe that they are a person with a soul, it's a whole lot easier. And that is what Robespierre is doing here. It's what the Nazis will do. It's what Pol Pot does. It's what Stalin does. It's what every leader in any war ever has had to convince their troops of, to a degree, that the people that they are killing are lesser than them. And so the language in this speech describes the conspirators of this so-called conspiracy as inhuman monsters. Yet again, coming out of Robespierre, this lesser than categorization of his enemies. And again, at the same time, he puts himself up as honest, humble, virtuous servant of the people. As the speech continued, he paints a picture of a conspiracy which was, again, working against him, I mean France. But there were two things about the speech that really bothered the people, the members, the delegates in the convention, because this was a convention-wide speech. First, Robespierre was actually going into pretty good detail. He was outlining specific factors of the conspiracy, like the nature of the plot in detail. He wasn't just saying, oh, I'm convinced that somewhere, somehow, William Pitt's funding, yet another foreign plot. He went into specific details. So it became clear to the people listening that this one probably is not made up, because he's citing facts that we can go out and confirm. He probably isn't blowing smoke. He's probably talking about something concrete here. But the other problem was that he wasn't naming names, apart from one guy, Pierre-Joseph Cambon, who was the state treasurer and considered by most people to be a pretty diligent and independent minister for the government. But as Robespierre went into detail about the rest of the conspiracy, there remained this faceless mob of conspirators, these unnamed perpetrators. Which meant that anyone might be on Robespierre's hit list and easily tied into this plot by him for the convenience of removing his enemies. People had at this point deduced his pattern, that he could take a real thing, or a made-up thing, but in this case probably a real thing, and just throw anybody he wanted into that bucket if he needed to get rid of them. It made the possibility of being caught up in some sort of guilt by association purge very palpable for all of the delegates who heard the speech. So possibly all those at the meeting. Yes, possibly all those at the meeting for sure. Anybody who is saying, hey, we should compromise. I don't think Saint-Just or Couton's on that list. Robespierre is not so stupid to kill off his absolutely most loyal people, because then that's a great way to have no loyal people ever. But I do believe he was aiming for a hoop to shoot the Committee of General Security through, for sure. When Robespierre wrapped up his speech, everyone, dutifully stood up and applauded. And then what turned into what is a pro forma matter, just a matter of, this is how it's always worked in the convention. A debate on procedure broke out about, should we publish this speech? Now, publishing and distributing major speeches of the convention was really routine. Like, anytime there was a major address within the convention, it was sent off to the printers and distributed in Paris so the literate could read it, or it could be read by street criers to the people. And ever since he came to power, pretty much everything Robespierre ever said was sent to the printer, which is why we have these speeches, because there are lots of copies of them, and it's why I can quote them when it's relevant. But as soon as he was finished speaking, a real debate broke out, and it was engineered by Fouché and Tallien, with the help of Desbois. Now, we've talked about the structure of these legislative bodies, and one thing that's remained consistent is the power of the presidency, which still continued to rotate on a monthly basis. Within the convention, the sitting president of the convention, was the guy who controlled who could talk. So, Fouché and Tallien worked with Desbois to set up Robespierre. Knowing that this speech was coming, they set him up a little bit. Robespierre was attacked for his vague fear-mongering. Delegates started to jump on this bandwagon of coming forward to demand that he name names. Like, we believe you that there's a plot here, but you're not telling us who's involved. Put the names down right now or shut up about this. And again, there's Desbois and Varenne, who had kind of cracked Robespierre a month earlier by denouncing him. Again, he is shocked by this affront to his dignity. And open war may have broken out right then and there that day as they debated this in the aftermath of his speech. But other convention leaders that were looking to, have that war not happen quickly got the session wrapped up before it could get, before things could get out of hand, right? But in reality, things were already really out of hand. That night, Robespierre took the identical speech to the Jacobin Club, where he did get the enthusiastic applause, the sort of support that Robespierre, and this lends to the ego argument that he was used to. But mental stability also needs that, supporting buttress of approval. Whatever the case, he delivers the speech. The majority of the Jacobin Club raucously applauds the speech. Doesn't care that he's not naming anybody. And in a reverse of the morning attacks on Robespierre in the convention, the Jacobins in the club rose up to denounce Desbois and Varenne, both who were present in the Jacobin Club that night, which I actually deemed to be a pretty risky move at this point. Georges Couthon moved that the pair should actually be expelled from the Jacobins. And it's not possible historically to say if they were actually kicked out and they lost their membership cards, but they were for certain driven from the Jacobin Club building physically that night. And now, just as Robespierre had been furious about the affront to his honor and dignity, it was now Desbois and Varenne's turn to be furious about the affront to their honor and their dignity. And so those two guys went back to the convention, which I have highlighted on the map in front of you so you could see it's the building on the left. It's got the black, the red line and the black note next to it. They went back to the Menage and went back to the Committee of Public Safety's meeting room to plan their next move. And guess what they found? Louis de Saint-Just, busy working on a speech of some kind that he planned to deliver the next morning. Now remember, just a few days ago, Louis de Saint-Just set to work on a speech that was supposed to be, everything's cool, everybody. And that is the speech he's working on at this time. The reassuring speech from the Angel of Death. The one that's supposed to deliver the message that everything's okay. But after everything that went down that day, Desbois and Varenne could not help but believe that Saint-Just was doing anything other than working on a mass denunciation. Do they do something? Not to Saint-Just right then and there, but yes. Oh boy, do they do something. But they couldn't believe it, right? There's Desbois and Varenne. They had just been, riotously expelled from the Jacobin Club. They go back to the Menage. They sit down in what is, their conference room. And there's Saint-Just, a Jacobin, who is not at the Jacobin Club, who's known to walk down onto the convention floor as the Angel of Death to deliver the written denouncements of Robespierre's enemies, furiously writing away in a corner. It's not a leap to get there for these two guys. That they got back there and they're like, he's probably signing our death warrant right over there in that corner right now. Well, he wasn't. But given Saint-Just's reputation and the way these things had always gone down, I probably would have thought the same thing.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
So, for Desbois and Varenne, there was zero time to lose. Those who feared the coming wrath of Robespierre after the affront to his dignity and honor in the convention came to the conclusion that they probably should strike first, because there probably also was not going to be an opportunity to strike second. So, the true conspirators against Robespierre spent all night plotting. They stayed up all night, putting together a plan that would bring him down. Because that night was July 26th into July 27th. And everything came to a head the next morning, July 27th, also known as 9 Thermidor Year 2, which is one of the most famous dates in the entire French Revolution, and probably one of the most important dates historically in the modern era. Robespierre was on hand at the convention on 9 Thermidor to hear the speech which Saint-Just had written. And it was that speech that everything's fine, fellas. We're all getting along just fine. Don't you down here in the convention worry about any infighting in the committees. That's all nonsense. That's basically what the speech was about. But Saint-Just had barely gotten going when Talleyrand interrupted the speech, and launched into a planned denunciation of Robespierre. Now, this one not occurring in the committee, but in the broad open convention. Remember, denunciation is suspect at that point. You are now suspecting somebody of being criminal under all of these wacko laws that they've passed in the past 2 years. Famously at this crucial moment, here's Saint-Just. He has the floor, right? He's up there at the podium, getting ready to deliver this speech, which he's worked on for several days. The quick-witted, always sharp-tongued, eternally self-confident, look at all the things I'm a genius in, Saint-Just was at a loss for words. He didn't say anything. He clearly either, and most probably, didn't expect this ambush, or maybe he did and thought that this was the time to jump off the train with Robespierre. I don't think it's that. I think that he was just like, but I had the floor, you know? So, instead of Saint-Just cutting down Talleyrand for interrupting him with some counter-denunciation of his own, Saint-Just just stood there, silently, at the podium, and tacitly ceded the floor to Robespierre's enemies. Remember again who's president, one of Robespierre's enemies. Watching this unfold, to his horror, Robespierre leapt up and attempted to defend himself. But guess what? Desbois said, "Sit down." Did not recognize him. Said, "You cannot speak." So Robespierre was forced to sit there, stewing angrily in his seat. This is a stark reminder that, yes, within the Committee of Public Safety, this little dictatorship that you're running, you're executive. You are the supreme ruler at this point in history. But in the broader convention, all it took was this small moment. And all you were was another delegate in this moment. And that's what mattered. He sat there. Robespierre did, stewing in his seat. And then the catcalls start to rain down on him from all over the convention, just mocking him, laughing at him, because I think at this point everyone realized this is the chance. Someone specifically said this, quote, "Look, the blood of Danton chokes him," end quote. In the one official quote that is like on the record at the convention that day from Robespierre, his last recorded words at the convention were this: "Danton? Is it then Danton you regret? Cowards! Why did you not defend him?" End quote. Robespierre passed the blame on to the rest of the convention, probably appropriately, that if they believed Danton was innocent, they did nothing to stop what happened to Danton. But in their defense, if they had, they were probably going to be executed right along with him. But Robespierre never got the opportunity to officially step up to the podium and fight back. With laughter and abuse now being heaped on top of him from all sides, someone in the convention moved that Robespierre be arrested, and then someone else moved that all of his closest friends should be arrested too. So before they could do anything about it, Robespierre, Saint-Just, Georges Couthon Robespierre's brother Augustine, who had, again, helped promote a young guy named Captain Bonaparte into a position of prominence, and a guy we've never mentioned before named Philippe Francois Joseph Lebas, who I will refer to as Lebas, who was just a tight associate of Saint-Just, were all arrested. So again, Robespierre, Saint-Just, Couthon, Augustine Robespierre, Lebas, all arrested on the spot while the convention was in session. Also slated for arrest by all of these motions was Francois Henriot. You'll remember that he was the guy who had been in command of the Paris National Guard since the insurrection of May 31st, June the 2nd, back in 1793. He was also a close friend of Robespierre and basically helped set up the whole thing by not intervening back in 1793. So, now, the revolutionary purist, the great virtuous one, Maximilien Robespierre, and his closest allies are in custody of the convention. Except for Henriot. He's not arrested yet. But word of this dramatic turn of events took no time at all to travel out of the convention and down to the General Assembly of the Paris Commune. And they sprang into action. Because you'll remember, the Commune had just been purged. And all the new members of the Paris Commune were personally appointed by Robespierre. So the Commune government was in his pocket to a degree. The tocsin bells, as they're called, the warning bells, the rally to action bells, began to ring out in all of the sections to alert them that they had to rise up. And then Francois Henriot went down personally to the convention to assess the situation, and when he showed up, he was also arrested and taken into custody. The other prisoners, prior to Henriot's arrival, had already been taken to the meeting room of the Committee of General Security, where they were going to be held until the convention figured out what to do with them. In the meantime, the sections of Paris rallied to the Hôtel de Ville, which is now on the right side, marked on the map. And they began to prepare for yet another armed march on the convention to cow the national government into submission. But remember, we talked about how the street energy was just gone, right? What are all the charges for these people? Guilty by association? It's not going to matter. There is no official record of charges, and I'm going to get to why in a little bit. Bloodthirsty tyrant be good enough, but there is no list of charges. But again, the Commune tries to rally the sections, but there is no energy in the street because most of Paris is pretty. They got what they want. They've got the maximum among the maximums everywhere and all the commodities. They've gotten all the enemies of France pushed back, and generally speaking, they're not too angry. Because the Commune is not the power it had once been, because Robespierre had purged it, and because the Committee of Public Safety had done such a good job getting the sans-culottes in line and calming them down, it just wasn't driven. The sections weren't driven. They weren't as united of purpose as they had been in the past. So of the 48 sections of Paris, only 13 sent companies of armed insurrectionists to the Hôtel de Ville. The rest of them, they've effectively switched sides at this point. We'll take our second break, and we'll come back to go through the thrilling conclusion of Maximilien Robespierre's life and that of his closest friends and allies as we bring Act 1 of the French Revolution to a close. Thanks for hanging out tonight, everybody. Back in just a few minutes. Hopefully you've enjoyed this so far. And, it's not as simple as it was for the ultras and the indulgents. Let's just put it that way. Because, they're in custody for the moment. And we'll see what happens next.
No way!
soften in the Iron Maiden? Excellent!
Let's rock!
Welcome back. Time for the thrilling conclusion. Thanks for hanging out tonight, everybody. Thank you for the resubs and your support as always. This is a moment for me in Fixer's heavy metal history, because if I was to bring the curtain down tonight, I can honestly and ethically say that I covered the French Revolution. But I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe that I've done the job until I put Napoleon in as first consul. So it's still one of those milestones for me where look at how much has happened and how much I've spoken. I'm easily approaching 100 hours spoken on the French Revolution, and I'm getting close to 400 pages written. It's an insane total. And you guys showing up here and talking at me in chat while I talk at you, and being inquisitive and participating in the end of episode quizzes, absolutely what gets me to the point, early to midweek, where I'm like, time to sit down and start writing. It's certainly been more difficult since I've taken on the new job, but I don't have any intent of changing that. I have found new rhythm. It's a more broken rhythm to writing and reading, to produce this on a weekly basis. But I know that when I took the job in December, it was kind of like, well, we'll see. I'm coming out of that really hectic phase. I have mango and cranberry juice here, dude. Just was a little tart. I'm coming out of that hectic phase work-wise, where reviews are done. I got one left to write. I was interviewing a replacement for a former colleague, and then I interviewed for my job, and then I had to interview my backfill, and that process is now done. So I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit of time back at the job and a little bit ahead of things, to where I'm not working so late, and so I feel like my rhythm will improve. So I'm through what I believe to be the crucible of change with respect to keeping this series alive. So you guys showing up, asking questions, Dustin talking about it in your stream, what happened, and encouraging the discourse, and everyone just being interested. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, because it kept me going the past 6 weeks for sure. That getting this show off was down to the wire a couple times, where I was late into Thursday or late into Friday before I was finished, and I don't see that really changing, but I know how to do it correctly now. And so I can't say thank you enough for just, I look over and I see the same names all the time that are here listening to me talk. So, end of spiel. Just want to say thank you, and that I appreciate it. So before we took the break, we talked about how the convention had just pretty much arrested Robespierre, his brother, Saint-Just, Couthon, Lebas, and now they've arrested Henriot. And then the Paris Commune decides to do something about it, and they ring the tocsin bells. And only 13 of 48 Paris sections send armed troops to do something about it, right? But enough people did muster to have a go at freeing the prisoners. And this mob from these 13 sections did march on the convention. But when they got there, they discovered that of all the prisoners, Henriot was the only one still actually inside the convention. The Committee of General Security was not stupid, and they tried to quickly disperse prisoners. Get in on the muster. They took the prisoners and they tried to disperse them. Like one to that prison, one to that prison, one to that prison, one to that prison, one to that prison. So that the mob couldn't focus on one place, that they were all being held, and free them all. But to counter this, the Commune government of Paris sent orders out to all the city prisons to not open their doors to these inbound prisoners. And the jailers of these prisons were obviously more loyal to the Commune than to the convention. And they uniformly blocked the doors and intimidated the agents of the convention into releasing Robespierre and his friends. So they were arrested, and now they're not, and they're free. This is what presumably happened, because all these guys who had just been arrested from the convention floor, before you know it, they're free, and they're rallying back at the Hotel de Ville. And this is why we don't have a list of charges. Because in response to their escape, in response to the news that the prisoners didn't make it to the prisons they had been sent to, and now were, holed up in the Hotel de Ville, the convention passed a decree declaring the prisoners that had just escaped outlaws, which was a formal designation that meant legally all anyone had to do was positively ID them, and they could be executed on the spot without trial. So there were no charges, because there would be no trial, because now they were outlaws. Now in this moment, things really could have gone either way. Back at the convention, the armed mob outside had proven intimidating enough that they secured the immediate release of Henriot. So now everyone's free and rallying back to the Hotel de Ville on the east side of the Seine River. But this was the high point of the day for what are going to now start calling the Robespierreists, because that is the term history starts to call them at this point. Henriot stepped out from his jailing at the convention, took a look around, and clearly saw that he did not have a strong enough force to maintain a siege at the convention. Especially because he heard that the convention was rallying the remainder of those 48 sections to produce K's. Welcome in. Henriot had gotten word that the convention was rallying the remainder of those 48 sections to produce a street army of their own to come at Henriot's army, because it was now Henriot in charge of the mob of 13 sections that had tried to intimidate the convention. This new street army that was going to back the convention was being drawn from the western and central sections of Paris, the more temperate, less crazy sections of Paris during the Revolution. These are the ones who had not heeded the Commune's ringing of the tocsin bells. So Henriot decides to, let's not stay here. takes his mob back to the Hotel de Ville to have a showdown basically on their home turf. Now the convention appoints Paul Barras to lead the men flocking to the convention's banner. And it is this appointment that is going to be big for Barras, because remember, he's going to be a force in the executive of the coming directory. This is his moment. But it took the rest of the day to gather up and organize all these volunteers coming from those remaining Paris sections. But as the convention's forces began to grow throughout the day, the Commune's forces, the Robespierreist forces, were starting to melt away. Again, the turnout for the Commune's forces had been pretty bad from the start, right? Only 13 of all the sections sent troops. And those men who had shown up and marched to the convention and now back to the Hotel de Ville, they could tell this wasn't going to go their way. It wasn't going to be their day. And it just wasn't going to, end well for them if they stuck around. So, as the sun began to set and night descended on them at the Hotel de Ville, the men of the Commune's forces were like quietly slipping away, disappearing, going home one by one, as the convention's forces began to really get big. And every time Henriot kind of looked up from his planning and looked around, there were less men at his command. Now we come to it. Finally, at 2 a.m. on July 28th, Paul Barras marched his men on the Hotel de Ville. When they got there, the place was pretty much undefended. Most of Henriot's men had deserted, gone home, and, the capture of everyone inside was pretty much a foregone conclusion. And this is when we get to the tough part, the part I warned everyone about. It's a little bit more graphic when we started the show tonight. The scene inside and outside of the Hotel de Ville that night is the stuff of tragic, depressing nightmares. Augustine Robespierre tried to escape out a window. Because, again, they could look out the windows. They could see that there was no one defending them, and this was a foregone conclusion. So he tried to escape out a window. And as he was scooting along a ledge, he lost his footing. The onlookers looking up at that window saw him fall 3 stories to the ground. And it shattered both of his legs. And as he lay in agony on the ground, now on the grounds outside of the actual physical building of the Hotel de Ville, laying there with completely shattered legs, he's just laying there in agony, and no one did anything. They just pushed past him and went inside. And as they went inside, the first thing they found was Georges Couthon. They found his body, broken and bloody, at the bottom of a staircase, but alive. He had somehow gotten tipped out of his wheelchair, and he laid in an absolute busted heap on the floor at the base of the stairs. He was alive, but similar to Augustine Robespierre, in absolute agony. Meanwhile, upstairs, Lebas had managed to smuggle in 2 pistols into the Hotel de Ville. One of which he handed to Maximilien Robespierre, and the other he used to shoot himself in the head and commit suicide. So Lebas is dead. Now Robespierre took the pistol and almost certainly tried to commit suicide. But with 0 experience handling a gun, and his nerves no doubt shot, whether to the afore discussed, is he actually mentally gone? At this point, there's just nothing left of the man. He is completely shot.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
He had no experience handling a gun whatsoever. So all he managed to do was blow off half his jaw, and it didn't detach. It just hung there. So when the convention's forces made it to the 2nd floor, They found him too on the floor, on the ground, writhing around in agony with half his jaw hanging off his skull. A couple of hours after all this went down, people also found Henriot, who, like Augustin Robespierre, had attempted to escape out of a window. But also like Augustin Robespierre, he had fallen 3 stories into an open sewer. And he had laid there with broken legs for 3 hours before being discovered. And at that point, when he was found, he begged to be simply finished off. But instead, his broken and absolutely filthy body was taken into custody. So you have Augustin Robespierre alive with broken legs, completely destroyed legs. Henriot alive, covered in just putrid refuse from the sewer of Paris, because it was an open sewer, broken legs. Maximilien Robespierre alive, but with his jaw blown off and still hanging from his skull. Georges Couthon, who knows the degree of damage done to him from his tumble down the stairs. Bad, really bad, but not enough to kill him. Only Saint-Just managed to survive all of this assault with even a shred of dignity. He had been in the room with Robespierre and Lebas, but he simply stood there stoically as he awaited his arrest and, absolutely certain death. The body of the half-conscious and, bloody Robespierre, Maximilien Robespierre, was taken to the meeting room of the Committee of Public Safety, which is an ironic twist because that's the room he basically was the dictator of France from. And they laid him out on the meeting table. And the consensus seems to be that no one expected him to live, that he wasn't going to make it to morning. So what did they do? They just left him there. Jaw still hanging off the skull, in pain, bleeding all over the place. It was not until dawn that they realized he's probably not going to die. And they had a doctor come in, and that doctor at least had the decency to take the jaw and push it back up against the skull and then tie it back together with a handkerchief so his jaw was still there, on his face. It's a grim ending. Even that would be a grim ending for these men. Even if they were thrown in prison, as broken and battered as they were for the rest of their lives, it'd be a pretty grim ending. But it ain't over. That ends the reaction. Yeah, that's not all. That ends the reaction. The Committee of Public Safety under Maximilien Robespierre is dead at this point now, and obviously in France. But because all of these men had been dubbed outlaws, there would be no trial for these condemned. But instead of killing them as quickly as possible, the carts did not come around to pick them up until, what remained of them, until late in the day. The same day that Robespierre had the handkerchief tied. In the meantime, the convention sent agents out to round up the remaining hardcore Robespierrists. And when the tumbrils finally did come around with the rest of them, there were about 22 total men who were loaded up and taken away to be executed. But to their own probable surprise, the prisoners were not carted off to east of La Place de la Bastille, but they were carted off to La Place de la Révolution, because for this particular execution, and probably the reason for the day-long delay, the committees had decided to move the guillotine back to the spot it normally had been in for much of the Reign of Terror. So at about 7 p.m. that night, the execution process got going. And it had to be a pretty pathetic spectacle. Henriot, you'll remember, broken-legged, sat in a sewer, was only half conscious when he was dragged up to the scaffold and thunk. Couthon was so busted that they actually had to strap his body to a plank to hold it together so that he could be like shimmied up underneath the blade, he was in significant pain before Madame la Guillotine made it all go away. Saint-Just was, again, one of the only ones who managed a dignified exit. He had no pithy final words. Nothing clever, nothing witty came from the Angel of Death. Just zip the done. But at least somewhat dignified. He had escaped it all, the least scathed of all of the Robespierreists. And then Robespierre himself, Maximilien Robespierre, was saved for last. Through what must have been an insane amount of pain. He is walking up on his own power with a handkerchief still attached to his jaw, holding the whole thing to his skull. He gets up to the guillotine, gets under the blade, all on his own self-power. No one had to carry him up there. He walked up. But his final moment's absolutely horrific. The executioner had to look down at this handkerchief that was holding the man's jaw to his skull and said, I can't guarantee that that thing's not going to interfere with the operation of the blade. So what did he do? The executioner reaches down and just rips it. Rips the handkerchief away, which sends the jaw of Robespierre basically flying back off his face. Robespierre let out a scream, a loud scream that continued. He just kept screaming until the blade comes down and silenced him. Gilly, thank you for the resub. 20 months, tier 1. Much appreciated. They all sound like awful ways to die. I only laugh because these guys were pretty horrible. And I don't have a problem with, kind of making a little bit of comedy about the death of tyrants. What's up, Diggity? I've seen you lurking all night. Thanks for hanging out, my friend. So there it is. These 22 Robespierreists are dead. The next day, 83 more so-called because can you really be sure it wasn't just the remaining people in power rounding up their enemies? But 83 more so-called Robespierreists were, mostly members of the Paris Commune Assembly, rounded up, arrested, and boom, executed. They did see a tribunal. But this makes this purge of this group the bloodiest of all of them. Of all the factional executions that we've had to take care of so far, this is the biggest one. Hopefully this was the final purge, the final mass purge of, some faction of opposition, maybe, hopefully, maybe. In retrospect, 9 Thermidor Year 2 is a watershed date in the French Revolution for sure, and world history in the modern era, most probably. The fall of Robespierre will lead to a significant redirection of the course of the revolution. All of the recently accrued powers of the Committee of Public Safety were going to be stripped away. All of the ideological excesses of the past year would be drawn back from. No more de-Christianization, no more civic cults. No more attempts to force people on pain of death to simply be what they were not. When our man, Lazare Hoche, who we talked about again finally last week, does finally come along and put out the last brush fires of guerrilla war out in the Vendée in 1796, he's not going to do it with Republican baptisms and infernal columns, but instead with conciliation and understanding. It ends the viciousness. More immediately, 9 Thermidor marks the official historical end of the Reign of Terror. Not that this is the end of political, executions, not by a long shot. But the days of mass murder as the foundation of public policy, those are over. But the tricky part is that the men and women of France did not know that. They did not know it at the time, that this event marked the end of the terror, and that the directions I just described are how it is going to be in a post-Robespierre revolution. They didn't know which direction things were going to go next. They were now going to have to figure all that out for themselves, because that lack of rules and structure and the stated purpose that Robespierre referred to is still present. So next episode, we will take our first steps out into the light of what is known as the Thermidorian regime. The men left standing in the wake of all of this now have to figure out what the hell happens next. We're not going to have an episode next week on February 19th. This marks a very specific marker point in our shared journey through all of this. Again, as was stated, I just got through a pretty busy period for me work-wise. I actually pre-planned this episode to occur right as I was wrapping up everything at work, which is going to lead me to a place next week where I only work 3 days and have a 4-day weekend, and I'm going to take advantage of that 4-day weekend by relaxing. This also tonight ends. This will be the last episode for the second season of the quiz. And when I come back from that long weekend, we will begin to lay the narrative groundwork for Act 2 of the French Revolution. But here's the difference. We spent 3 solid episodes when we first got started laying the groundwork. We had to give context to what we were going to talk about. You don't need that now because you have that context, 31 episodes of it. So where do you think we're going to go? Where do you think France is going to go now that Robespierre is gone and the Robespierrists have been executed? Where do you think the men in power, while there is still a Committee of Public Safety, still a national convention, think about, where do you think they're going to go? What do you think they're going to do? Because we're going to get into that in 2 weeks' time. There's a little bit of vacuum of power. But think about what they also perceive to be threats. As always, thank you all for hanging out. We're going to get into the quiz here in just a second. Hopefully you enjoyed this. And hopefully you are just a little bit, reveling in the fact that Maximilien Robespierre is dead. A lot of things can be said about him and Saint-Just. They are particularly evil people in my mind. But they weren't stupid. They weren't stupid until the end, where their own hubris and I believe some sort of God complex about, how they may have been untouchable at this point got the better of them. But over to the quiz we go. Oh, it's for sure karma bit them in the end. There's no doubt that that's true. So, the way the quiz works, everybody can participate. And this, there's a leaderboard, and Gilly's got 113 points. They're probably going to walk away with a swag offer from me tonight, unless Rocket puts down some Stream Loose cards to catch up. But the way this works is everyone can participate. This is designed to help me gauge, participation and interest in what's going on with heavy metal history. And, Rocket's like, nope, I won't cheat that way. Even though it's not cheating, perfectly legitimate part of the game. So, it's exclamation point answer, space, your answer. What happens is that answer gets written to a file in the order that they are submitted. It gets erased from chat so no one else can see it. And then at the end of the timer, I bring up the answers one by one. We read them, and if you're in the ballpark of the answer, we can usually give you a point. It's a great way to tell long-term how much you're retaining about what we're talking about here. It is, again, participation helps me. It makes me feel like, people are interested. So take a stab. Leave the joke answers at the door. No one's interested in
No way.
No one is
pre-trading.
interested if you think Robespierre was executed because he sponsored the wrong gamer fuel company or anything like that. Don't use the word boy or fix with 2 X's in your answer because it will trigger a different command and screw everything up. And after the first question is read aloud, you will have 1 minute to get your answer in. So here we go with the first one. What specifically about Catherine Thiot's ravings made her a political problem for Robespierre? Hey, I should actually type exclamation point question in there, huh? You got extra time. There we go. What specifically about Catherine Teo's ravings made her a political problem for Robespierre? Rocket has an answer in. Don't make this the 1 minute we have to wait just because Rocket's the only person answering show tonight. But that's looking like... I mean, no one's saying you, Gilly. Everyone understands why you couldn't be here tonight. But I did read what, and I'll pass this along because it was in Discord. Ari finally home. Well, I mean, if she's home, you're not concerned anymore, right? Out of the hospital? I'm joking? Still, the joke has to be made. All right. So the only answer comes from Rocket. It does suck. She said he was the second Messiah to end time, to leading to the end of times. Yeah, she stated that Robespierre was a Messiah, and so her trial would have been embarrassing it, and stopping it would prove Robespierre had a Messiah complex. So he was in a no-win situation based on what she was saying. That's the problem. But Rocket gets it. That does suck. You can't, the hospital won't fill the prescription, Gilly? They don't have a pharmacy in the building? It's just a thought. Rocket. There we go. I mean, you can always call them in the morning and cancel the order. They'll just, put the pills back in, go to the hospital and get it. Just a thought. And I know a night without pain meds after something like that has to probably suck. I'm pretty stoic. I usually just do whatever, but I know most people don't. All right, second question of the night. Again, exclamation point answer, space in your answer. Don't use boy or fix with two X's. What two similar events in May 1794 served to further shake Robespierre's shaky mental state? Cool. What two similar events in May 1794 served to further shake Robespierre's shaky mental state? What two similar events in May 1794 served to further shake Robespierre's shaky mental state? Rocket. Gilly's in. Gilly got an answer in. It's a fair question. Fair attempt, Gilly, but no. That's fine. Take a shot in the dark, man. So Gilly answers. He established himself as leader of the cult of Supreme Being. No. Rocket does have the answer, though. Cecile Renault came banging on the door with daggers to kill him, and someone else took a shot at Desbois the day prior, and everyone kind of thought that they really didn't go after Desbois. They really meant to go after Robespierre. So basically, 2 assassination attempts in 2 days, 2 supposed alleged assassination attempts in 2 days. Probably got him unhinged a little bit. Rocket gets that one right. Rocket up to 92. The next question. Why was the need for the terror being questioned rolling into the summer of 1794? While you answer, I'm going to begin the search for someone to raid. Also, for those of you that are waiting to do some drops after tonight offline, give me 15 minutes after the stream is over to kind of get things in order, and I'll be ready to go for that. $30 seconds left. Rocket is in. Why was the need for the terror being questioned rolling in the summer of 1794? Gilly, you probably could have inferred this from a past episode. Yep, 1794, not 1974. You're right. It's a typo in the way I typed the date. Good catch, Case. Keep saying 1794 even though it says 1974, but I mean 1794. Yeah, these guys weren't alive in 3 years before I was born. Rocket with her first answer, or her answer first. The war in the Vendée was pretty much over. The Federalists were gone, and the war was no longer being fought on French soil outside of Belgium. Yep, that is it. Where was the threat? Where was the threat to France? Gilly. Mass bloodshed without clear cause. Appeared to be used as a tool primarily to attack Robespierre's political enemies, not threats to the nation. That was what the people at the convention were leaning toward, but not the people in general. The feel in the street was not that. So that's valid, but not why the terror overall was being questioned. The next question. Why was Robespierre's, I'll spell that name right, why was Robespierre's new foreign plot described to the convention on July 6th, 1794, problematic for him? Remember, he gave this speech describing yet another foreign plot. He wanted a particular amount of detail. Why was that problematic? Why was that speech problematic for him? I believe it to be the speech that brought him down. Rocket is in. And she's got the answer. 20 seconds left. Gilly. Nope. Rocket's answer. Because while it could have been a very real threat, probably was, due to the level of detail he was going into, he did not name names except one, the finance minister. So it was this open-ended thing. She's right. It was this open-ended thing, and everyone felt like, oh, he's basically creating a very solid bucket that he can throw anybody's name into, and it is the thing that catalyzed everyone basically into action. Rocket gets it. Gilly's answer. Because everything that happened, all the events that occurred were on his watch and his responsibility. I don't even think he felt that. The next question. When Talleyrand interrupted Saint-Just on July 27th in the convention, what is particularly interesting about this event as it relates to Saint-Just? Rocket's in. Rocket has it. Sorry for it being so grisly tonight as well in the descriptions, but all that stuff happened. It wasn't like Georges Danton was just arrested and thrown into a jail cell. These guys got battered. And it's not to generate sympathy for them because I don't believe they're sympathetic people. It's just, that's what happened. It's horrifying. Gilly's in. Gilly got it, too. Yeah, battered by their own decisions. Yep. So when you hear historically about the Jacobins, this is the point at which they are no longer the controlling group of radicals in French history. They become, like, think of the term neo-Nazi. Neo-Jacobin is also a term, and it's not a good one. Rocket's answer. He remained silent. Yep. Stunned silence, really, but he's usually the quick-witted, has a sharp retort for everything, vicious tongue guy, and he didn't say anything. So Rocket gets it. And it provided the opportunity because, again, Desbois was in control as president, and Saint-Just was the recognized speaker. So he could have continued to speak, but he didn't. And when Robespierre tried to speak, he was told to sit down and shut up. Gilly, refused. Refused is not the right word, but he didn't say anything in response to the accusation against Robespierre. Yep. It's not that he said, I'm not going to. More that he was like, oh. But close enough. Good enough. Good enough to give the answer, given the circumstances. Next question. Pretty easy one. In the end, the fight that ensued on July 27th can be whittled down to two opposing groups. Who were they? There's several combinations of phrasings that are perfectly applicable here. Gilly is in. It doesn't get it right.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Now explain why that's not right. Rocket is in. Nope. So we'll talk about the structure of all this again then. Ah! Keys. Nope. So as we roll into this answer, my answer is the commune and the convention. Because at the end of the day, it's not, and I'm bringing Gilly's answer up, because he says the two committees, the Committee of Public Security and the Committee of Public Safety and the Committee of General Security. It's not them, because Desbois and Varenne are public safety members, and they're against Robespierre. So it can't be whittled down to the committee versus committee. Just not that simple. But what happens is the convention arrests Robespierre and his buddies, and the commune rings the bells to stand up to it. So I would take the convention versus the commune, or the convention versus the Robespierrists. But the convention as a body is certainly one of the two factions. Rocket. Robespierrists and the Committee of General Safety. No, because there is no Committee of General Safety. I even almost missaid it after I read it in your answer. Committee of General Security and the Committee of Public Safety. But again, there were crossing wires in those two committees about who was on whose side. And it does boil down to convention versus commune or convention versus Robespierrists. The ending fight is still convention forces, right? The convention forces led by Paul Barras against the commune forces that were being led by Henriot. K's answer. The left versus the right? No. Thanks for taking a stab, though. We have 4 questions left. How many of the denounced outlaws were injured during the assault on the Hotel de Ville, and who were they? How many of the denounced outlaws were injured during the assault on the Hotel de Ville, and who were they? That's the most not specific answer you've ever given, Kelly. Rocket's got it. Gilly's answer. I'm taking a shot in the dark and saying 3. It's 4. Gaze will take it even though it's after the buzzer. Robespierre and 2 other unfortunate fellows. Yes, it was Robespierre. 2 guys named Robespierre, actually. Maximilien and Augustine. Georges Couthon and Henriot were all injured horrifically during the assault. Lebas successfully executed himself, and Saint-Just did nothing. Rocket. Augustine Robespierre, Couthon, Maximilien, and Henriot. Yeah, we'll take it. 4 guys. 4 guys were really butchered that night. I can't take random guesses on a list of specific names. K's, I think, got in. No worries. As long as I can make it out. 15 people. No, 4 people. I specifically mentioned 4 pretty nasty injuries. Especially the jaw thing is just... I personally love that happened because the dude was such a piece of crap. But it is horrific to think about. Like, you fire what is a precursor to the Manet ball down a non-rifled barrel into your face, and you detach half the jaw from the socket, so it's basically hanging off down here. It's just nasty looking. It's nasty. Yeah, you shall orate no longer. All right, 3 questions left. This one should be a short answer for everybody. Where did the execution of the Robespierreists take place? Kind of good poetic given his speaking ability, agreed. Kind of poetic given that his mouth was such an instrument of just evil. Evil. It's a decent guess, Gilly. Kay's got it. Because he effectively translated the French portion in the middle of its name to English, but yes. 5 seconds left. Rocket. Palais de Révolution. It's Place, P-L-A-C-E, de la Révolution, but yes, I know what you mean. Gilly, really good guess. Champ de Mars. It would have been also fitting, but no. K's. Place of Revolution, which is what Place de la Révolution means. Yes. Push K's back on the board. Yes, it does! K's at 3 points. Sneaks back onto the board right at the end of the season. 2 questions to go. How many Robespierreists total were executed in the 2 days after the Thermidorian reaction? It's math time, because I didn't say the answer outright. I said 2 numbers on 2 different days, and they have to be added together. Remember, this is the bloodiest of all of the factional purges in the French Revolution. The absolute nastiest. Dr. Death gets in. And ironically answers incorrectly. Yep, Gilly says, oh, that means I'm wrong. It does indeed. K's in. It's a guess. Still fair. So 22 men were executed the first day. 83 are executed the second day, which makes 60 not correct. Somehow both of you said 60. Gilly's answer of 10. Nope. Dr. Death says 60. K said 27. When the answer is 105. 105 Robespierreists. No worries, Doc. Thank you for taking the stab. 105 Robespierreists over 2 days makes it the bloodiest factional execution of the entire revolution. And we'll go with what is an opinion question. Taking a stab at it basically gets you the point. Do you think that Robespierre had cracked mentally in 1794, leading to his demise? Explain why or why not. Do you think Robespierre cracked mentally in 1794, which led to or contributed to his demise? "15 seconds left. And I will take the answer after the buzzer. These are usually longer. Doc is in. All right, Doc is in. Keep writing if you want to answer. We'll read Doc's answer first. Gilly is in. Doc says, yes, I think the assassination attempts, in quotes, because they're not surely assassination attempts, drove him to insanity. Made him feel like he was a target, which he was. So here's my answer. I think yes. I think that it's a combination of things. I think his ego, his natural just ego led or exacerbated the problem. But I think when he got sick, something changed. He comes back, he has to kill his friends. Some of his friends anyway. Most of the people weren't, but there are a couple people in there and there's a reason I laid out that there was a tough decision there for him, especially around Camille Desmoulins. And then he comes back after that's done and immediately, faces assassination attempts, and then it gets denounced by what should have been his allies, people who had just sworn loyalty to him. I think all of it culminates in a breakdown. I don't think most people can get through that. Most people who exist in such an egotistical place probably cannot handle that, because he may have been an egoist. I don't think he was a narcissist, because all of his speeches are about the external benefit of France. I don't think it was narcissism that brought him down. I think it was the ego. His ego was just so damaged that he broke. Yeah, where there are enemies anywhere you see enemies anywhere. Yep. A lot of bad people, by the way, I'll give that to Doc. I almost forgot to. I don't think he was a narcissist. And a lot of people tend to think of, like Hitler was a narcissist, without a doubt. But he wasn't one, which makes him relatively interesting, because usually men in power tend to be narcissistical. Not got it. Thank you, Rocket. All right. The next answer comes from Gilly. The dude put himself at the head of a cult. So I'm inclined to say yes, but you can also see the steps that led him to the place of crazed dictator. I think he was just missing the conscience and restraint that should have told him he was gone too far. Fair enough. I always like the answers to these questions. Rocket. I believe he did. By the time the supposed assassinations occurred, plus the denunciation of him being a tyrant, he was just done. It was only through the Jacobin Club support do I believe he regained some semblance before he just broke again. Yep, that's all fair. Next answer. Yes, so many yes men can push you over the edge. So many yes men can push you over the edge easily when dealing with issues at the national scale. Sure, I don't think he had that many yes men as so much as please don't kill me men, but sure. Fair enough. K's at the end of the season lands in 7th place, I think. 8th place, behind Skinja. Any more answers? Manny, we'll be up for drops in about 15 minutes. 15, 20 minutes, something like that. That is the end of Season 2 on the quiz. Gilly the winner, 115 points. Rocket at 98. Arky at 23 in 3rd place. Turi at 19. Manny at 17. Dustin at 5. Skinja at 5. K's in 8th at 4 points. Perman Berlin, 3 points, round out the top 10. We'll reset this board for our next episode, which will not again. There will be no episode next week. Time for round 3. Gilly, let me know what swag you want from the store. If you want to donate that $20 to DAV or what you want to do with that. Congratulations. Well done. Again, the cards are there and will remain there for Season 3 and use them. They're there for you to get ahead of people when you're sure you know the answer. Davey, you got it. We'll add it to this month's donation, and then I will get those numbers out to you once the Twitch report comes in and my taxes are done, and I know that I'm good on all the money. I was kind of holding back on December, January to make sure that my tax calculations were good, and I only owe $35, so I'm solid. Oh, yeah. Thank you all for hanging out here tonight. Go back over to our main screen real quick.
Rock!
Manny, 5 Tier 1 gift subs to the community goes to Matster, Sturm, Siamco, Crackle Jackson, Zeb, all get subs. Thank you very much as always, Manny. Even though I'm sure you meant to do that anonymously. Too bad you forgot to click the box. So, I'm going to take us over to Zoltek. I don't often hang out there, but he is a friend of the Cat Feud community, and he is streaming right now. He's playing Grand Theft Auto. Looks like he's playing modded Grand Theft Auto in an RP form. I don't intend to hang out there because I do have plans with JMHKs and Manny right after the stream tonight to play some more Black Knight drops in Fortnite. But again, as always, thank you all for being here. That is a significant point in the French Revolution. And we'll pick up where we go from here and start laying the groundwork for the directory, which is going to lead pretty quickly, like maybe 10, 11 episodes until we're seeing Napoleon in power and wrapping up things here. But something along those lines. Maybe 10 to 13 episodes, somewhere in there. But as always, thanks for hanging out. We are going to get out of here. Make sure you hang out with my good friend Odd Dustin Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. I think he's going back to Horizon Zero Dawn to finish the DLC this week. There's Permanoob, who I regretfully am struggling to hang out in his streams, just lurking. He's playing AC Odyssey, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. weekdays. And then there's Gilly, wishing Ari the best from all of us here in the Outlaws family to her. Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, getting back hopefully on a regular schedule, probably more later in the week at 6 p.m. And then Intent Rocket, Tuesday, Thursday afternoons, Saturday mornings. Playing LA Noire this morning. I hung out for a little bit, tried to scare her while I was doing some other stuff. Don't forget to hang out with our friend CF Live. He made the BRB music with Max Music and made our normal intro music, which hasn't been used the past 2 weeks. And along with CF Live, make sure you give Diggy a follow. He also helped contribute to the intro music, hangs out with us all the time in the background, though he doesn't talk very much during history, but is my good friend. I love you all. Have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you in history in 2 weeks. Other streams before that.
Be excellent to each other.